Yeah. Good evening. Surprise hangout that was supposed to be yesterday, but is today. Surprise! Oops.
We're not good at scheduling, guys. Maybe you know this.
It's happening now. It doesn't matter. So since was it last week that I did that review of the Blackthorn Key, or 2 weeks ago?
I don't know.
It might have been 2 weeks ago now. Time flies so quickly when you're in retail. Oh goodness.
Like breaking your toe, getting the flu, getting the stomach bug.
Norovirus, no fun. No. Anyway, so I did a review of the Blackthorn Key, which is a young reader, so it's a middle grade novel. It's on the older end of middle grade for sure. It's a chunky book. But one of the things that I said in that review, which of course is going to be linked up above, was that it was way more violent than I was expecting from a kid's book. So we wanted to talk about violence in particular in kids' books, but also just in general dark themes in children's books and sort of how that's expected or perceived by parents and by kids and by booksellers like us, whose job it is to hand things over to children. Especially me. Look at his face.
Because one of the first things that Michaela said when she found the violence in the book was like, "Oh, I didn't expect that."
Yeah.
And so, what is that expectation that we have going into young adult books versus teen books versus adult books?
Right.
But like,
so my pitch, because I do have parents ask when they get like an 11, a 12-year-old in the kids section, is like they really should start moving out of the kids section, start going into maybe the teen. And I said, well, teen and the middle grade fiction is actually the same reading level. The grammar structure, the length of them are, the teen stuff might be a little bit longer, but there are some pretty chunky young readers too. The difference is really in the themes. The teen titles are going to have like kissing stuff and more violence and like fighting and those darker themes, whereas the expectation with the young readers is that it knows that that's going to a younger audience, so it's not going to have that sort of stuff in it. It's not expected that kids are interested in reading about kissing. They hold hands. Oh my god. Oh my god, they held hands.
Maybe someone's on an ankle.
Oh no. But also just like you don't want kids to be afraid, but when they start becoming teenagers, you want them to be introduced to sort of the reality, which is that violence is a thing that happens in conflict.
So, because there's this fine line, right? Especially like as a bookseller, I think I do not sell in the children's section as often as Michaela does, because that's where Michaela lives. But you have the parents, and they walk up to you, and they're like, I need a good book without, like, you know, all of these scary themes. I need no violence. I need no blah, blah, blah. Because they're really afraid to hand that to their child, or they don't want their child to be exposed to that early. And that's a parenting choice that you can make. Like, we don't have kids. We're not going to tell you how to raise your kids.
No.
But it's something that we definitely have to be aware of. But also, I think don't expect to find as much in kids' books. So when I hear that when someone's browsing with their kid in teen, I'm like, maybe we should go back into juvie and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But then you get books like The Blackthorn Key,
which does still have fairly graphic violence in it. There's descriptions of kids throwing boiling liquid on other kids and slicing kids' faces open with broken vials. This description of a person being disemboweled, literally disemboweled. Yeah, there's some pretty dark graphic stuff, and I actually appreciated the fact that that was there in the kids' book, because so often when there is violence, it's sort of like brushed over and seen as like a necessary act that doesn't actually affect the people who did the action. They just continue on with their life. That you don't really see that, even though the person getting hurt is a bad guy in this case, that they are still just a kid doing something, and they got physically injured, physically marred permanently.
Violence is often put into be as like the warrior figure, like the hero, and as such, violence can only be done to like a bad person, and this is all, but it's often glossed over even in teen, and this is what I talked about in a bunch of my disappointing books for the year, is that I pick some books specifically because they promise a darker, grittier teen, because, you know, teens doing all the dystopia stuff, the fantasy stuff, but even when there is violence involved, when you're literally like overthrowing governments, viva la revolution, like very, very rarely are there actual consequences, like the dying, the maiming. It happens to like minor characters. It happens in bulk contexts that don't leave any idea of the magnitude of what that is. And it's, so even in teen, there's this idea that violence is an avenging force of the good hero, or not real, even when, you know, you're throwing out a government, you know. Like people are dying, which is why
it
books
happens
like the Hunger Games,
a lot.
We're really like, I don't like the Hunger Games books as they're written, but I appreciate the themes. It's one of the reasons why I liked the end of the Divergent series by Veronica Roth, because, you know, things happen and I was like, real consequences. Because that's the danger of putting in not realistic violence, is that you teach somebody that violent acts can be done in the name of justice or have no repercussions. And
while violent acts can be done in the name of justice, you should still weigh whether the violence versus the non-violence is worth it, and you aren't going to understand why you would weigh it if you don't understand the repercussions. Like you need to understand that. So that was the thing. And I wanted to talk about, I have had people come into my section and I start recommending a book like Pax, which has a very cute little fox on the cover, and in this instance it was a woman, and she opened it up and was flipping through and just reading a little bit, and she goes, oh no, this won't work. The fox at one point's getting chased by a coyote or something, and I don't want him reading about this. And she put it back, and part of my brain is going, nature? And you were looking at the beginning of this book. So obviously the fox is not going to die in this instance. I don't even think the fox is going to get injured in this instance. It's just supposed to be like, ooh, scary, like, ooh, no, sort of thing. And to me, that's too far. Like, it's going too far into the don't show this to kids thing, because that kid is, it's natural, that's reality, and it isn't even an act of the protagonist. It's just, if you are a creature that is not at the top of the food chain, there's going to be things you got to watch out for. So I wanted to sort of talk about, like we were talking about, how it creates this false sense of security in anything in general. Like the removal of the violence, even more so than the sort of cleanliness of a lot of violence in these books. If you're only ever giving, so say you were a person who grew up and only ever read books where nobody died and nobody was fighting, and then all of a sudden you get into your first relationship and you there's a fight that happens, not like a fisticuffs fight, but like an argument. You've only read that everything ends in sunshine and rainbows. So that's got to be very traumatic. I try to discuss with parents who are a little unsure about things, about how if you aren't sure whether your kid is ready for it, please remember that this is a book. It's a safe place to encounter these sort of scary ideas that might show up in real life. A lot of times parents who are nervous about violence or maybe romantic things in particular books, I say, well, read it with them and talk about it, and talk about your experiences and talk about the characters' experiences, because it's easier to talk about someone else than it is to talk about yourself when you're going through something for the first time. and you feel more prepared having experienced that with the characters in a way.
And I think a lot of it too kind of assumes that children are growing up in a vacuum. Like if you have a computer, no, it's called the internet. And also, my personal feeling is that a lot of times, even for myself, I will tend to underestimate a child's intellect, a child's reading experience, because we see a child of a certain size, a certain stature, a certain age, and assume things. And this is with my work in kids and children's literature and young adult literature has been one of my pet projects, talking about, kids can read and understand, not even just like reading, but understand more about the world than we think. And they, even just from conversations with adults that they listen to, and again, allowing them to interact with that in a book makes it for a safer space, a more explained space. Because one of our points was about, trusting professionals, publishers, writers, whatever, to craft an appropriate book for the age range. And so that's one of those things, like you have to understand that this isn't just a book that somebody said, like spun a dial and was like, what label are we gonna put on it? And it landed on kids and they were like, gonna shelve it here. That's very, very, very unlikely.
Yes.
And so there are people who write children's literature they know that they're writing for teens, and they know that like the young reader is 7 to 12. They know these things, and while some of them might slot it for the younger or the older end of that scale, they know who they're writing for and the story they want to tell, and it's been approved by a publisher, it's been approved to sell in that genre.
Yep. So things I even still get parents who don't want to give Goosebumps to their kids, and I completely understand it if the kid doesn't like horror stories. One of the things I want to talk about is scary stories to tell in the dark. I'm hopefully going to do a review of this for you guys for tomorrow. I might have to film that today. Now, since I haven't done the thing, I'm going to do the thing. But I mean, we all know I really like horror as it is, but that was a book from my childhood that I read in like 3rd grade that was really scary. And I was telling Gretchen that even some of these stories stick with me until today. And they teach you lessons through the fear that is of these fake things that you become one step removed from. And Goosebumps in particular are not actually scary at all. They have the scary covers, but they aren't like, they're really silly. They have all of these like, something jumped out of the bushes, and then the chapter ends, and then the next chapter, it was my dog Spike, and you're like, really? Like, ooh, jump scare. Not actually a jump scare. Nothing bad's happening. I can't tell you how many times in Goosebumps it was everything that happened in one chapter is just explained by the person being asleep. It was a dream. It was all a dream. So they're not actually as scary as they look. And obviously some kids are going to be more interested in reading something like that than other kids, but you shouldn't overlook a book because it looks scary or it looks like it might have violence in it.
Children who don't want to read scary stories won't read scary stories. That was me as a kid. Like if I saw a spoopy cover, I was like, where's the Nancy Drew?
Trixie Belden.
Yeah, Trixie Belden. I read those. Like I wanted the adventure books, and I think that's a really good thing that covers in kids' books are really good at showing. Like you can get a really good sense of what it is. Like the Blackthorn Key cover is, and again, maybe we'll link it up above. I did a really long video about the history of YA covers. And so when you look at the Blackthorn Key, the cover looks like a teen book.
It does.
It looks like a teen book. Like you could, if you've walked through the teen aisle and then see that book, you could be like, oh, you could shelve this here. And like books that are spoopy look spoopy. Books that are adventures look adventurous. Whimsical looks whimsical. Like there's a lot broader range of books because they're not all packaged the super same like they are in teen.
Yeah.
Again, please see my video for more on this. But like you have to kind of trust that if your kid wants to read scary stories,
they're okay with maybe getting spooked.
Yeah, and buying a children's book from the juvie section that is spooky is way better than letting them pick, I don't know, a scary story off your shelf, a scary story from teen. Like, if a kid wants to read a thing, the kid will read the thing.
Yeah.
The method of how they get their hands on it, you know, if you don't sit there and let them like work with you on that, then they might go out and find something you really don't want them to read, something that is not age appropriate.
I'm gonna go grab Stephen King.
I'm 22 and I don't read Stephen King. Like, no.
The last thing I wanted to talk about was that I feel like this sort of removing violence and sort of cleaning of children's books is a very new thing, because even a lot of the classics that all of these parents would have read growing up, things like books by Roald Dahl, a lot of the classics like, what are we going to do? Number the Stars, Old Yeller, Black Beauty, all of these stories have very tragic endings in a lot of cases, and are very sort of scary, sort of somber, have these dark elements to them, because the original children's story, being fairy tales and fables, also were that way. It's a way to teach children through storytelling without them actually having to do the thing. Again, these books are a way for these themes and problems to be introduced to these kids before they actually have to deal with the actual like life personal effects of things like that.
I mean, there was one, I had a parent the other day with her daughter there, and I was like, all right, what are the recommendations that we want? And she said she's really into sad stories right now, like sad stories. And so her mom was going with her, picking them out with her, reading the backs with her, so she could, you know, the mom could be like, you know, why is this sad? Like, what's the age level? But I mean, she was letting her do it.
Yeah.
And I mean, if that's what you got to do, because again, I think she understood that there was something that her daughter was getting out of them, that there was something that she was learning.
Yeah.
And not letting her read them wouldn't help.
No. And I was really proud of one group of parents that came in, because not only were they letting the kids pick books that they could read by themselves, but they were picking books that they could read as a family that would appeal to all of the kids. So they were picking from the young reader shelf, because even though one kid was pulling from teen, young readers is still sort of applicable to teen. It's just got some slightly different structure and a different theme. Most likely they had, you know, the 7-year-old who's starting to read those on her own, and then like even a little like 5-year-old who's just starting to read, and they would sit and read something like this all together, because even though everybody is at different levels of, you know, progression and growth, it doesn't mean that you can't all enjoy the same story and discuss the same story for different reasons. So yes, violence, darkness is okay.
And there's nothing wrong with the mediated form in children's books, moving up the teen books into adult books. Like, I totally understand not wanting to let young children near like adult level violence, adult level horror. Like, that's just scary. And I don't want to read it half the time either. And I read as an escape. You know, I don't want to read the sad story. I don't want to read the scary story. But like, children who read are in this great position of being able to learn about these things in safe spaces. Like we were saying, to be able to, especially if you can do this with them on like at a younger level, that they're still okay with reading with their parents, or like, you know, finding books that everybody wants to read and being able to discuss them, because the idealized violence that shows up where like, it's okay that there was violence because nobody got hurt.
Except the bad guy.
Yeah, that's not teaching the right
lessons.
And that's, I think that in the end, that's probably worse. And again, kids aren't growing up in a vacuum. Like, they're going out and they're watching superhero movies with super violence.
Playing video games.
Playing video games. Like, I think that we might as well allow them to experience a more realistic sense of it rather than like, pew, 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 shot his head off. Hey, look at the graphics as the brain explodes. No. No.
So yes, I think that's all that we wanted to say. What do you guys think? Do you agree with us that violence and dark themes is okay in kids' literature? Do you think that we should trust the people who are writing the books and like publishing the books, that they know that it's the correct amount of violence and the correct amount of dark themes? Or should we just like, no violence, everything is happy forever? Just always happy.
Comment down below. Down there. Do your thing. And we will try and do our next Betwixt live stream on its scheduled day, which is now Wednesday. Please do look forward to us. Look forward to it, because we aren't finishing the Magician's Trilogy by Lev Grossman once a year in January. The last 2 years we've done one of those books because we hate them so much we can't read them back to back. Yes. But we are finally finishing the saga with The Magician Land coming up on the 25th, yes. I do believe. Taylor, unfortunately, will be there for that, so you'll have to look at his face and hear his voice. I'm not looking forward to that either. But we'll be there, so everything will be great.
Bye, guys.